Hi there, teacher friends. I'm so excited that you're here today. We are going to be going over ways to get started with book clubs in your classroom, and hopefully today you'll take away some tips and ideas that you could start using this school year. This workshop is created for teachers in upper elementary, 3rd through 5th grade. If you've taught book clubs in the past or used them in your classroom and you're wanting to get new ideas, this is perfect for you. And if you are brand new to book clubs, this is also going to be a place that you're going to find some great resources. So before we get started, I want to make sure that you've downloaded a handout that I provided. In the handout, there's going to be some pages that you could take notes and write down some ideas that I share. Also, there are some freebies in there, 3, that you get to take away today that are exclusive to this workshop. They are editable so that you can use and customize to meet your students' needs. So while you're downloading that, I am going to go over a little bit about me. So as I stated at the beginning, my name is Jacqueline Ortiz. I am the creator at the Little Ladybug Shop. I'm so excited to be here today to share one of my greatest passion, book clubs. So I have been an educator in Texas for the past 19 years. I have multiple teaching certifications, including reading specialization, dyslexia, ESL, GT. I have my bilingual certification and my master's in administration. My husband Andrew and I reside in Cyprus with our 3 young kiddos, and we are just some busy parents with them actively in sports and other activities. I have such a passion for writing curriculum. I've been writing it since 2002 for my district, and I started writing it in 2015 for the Little Ladybug Shop. So you can find a lot of my resources on there and some helpful tips that I love sharing with teachers. I am currently a reading and writing consultant here in Houston, and I work with upper elementary teachers. So if you ever need anything, you can find me at my website, on Instagram, Facebook, sometimes Twitter, at the Little Ladybug Shop. So before we get started, people often wonder, what are book clubs? How do I use them with kiddos? What is so great about them? So the best thing is that book clubs are very similar and for school-aged kids as they are for adults. So if you've ever done book clubs with your friends, that's basically the same thing that you're going to have in your classroom. Of course, modified. So when you meet with your friends, you probably meet once a week or once a month, just depending on your schedules. But in the classroom, you're going to meet more often. Your groups can range from 2 to 6, depending on your class size. They can meet depending on your class time. So a lot of that changes up to your class schedule. So that's the great thing about book clubs, is that you get to make them customizable to your needs. I love using book clubs for so many different reasons. The biggest reason is that students really grow as readers and develop such a love for books through book clubs. And you are going to see that as you start using book clubs in your classroom, or if you have been using them, you probably already know that they are just some of the best ways for students to engage with other kiddos. They also are able to explore new genres in text. I have students that have never read nonfiction before, and because of book clubs, they're able to start reading nonfiction and find a love for it. They also develop a great sense of responsibility and accountability. You're going to see students actively participate. Students that are usually very quiet, they learn to become more comfortable because they are able to meet in those little groups with their students, and they develop such confidence in themselves. So they really gain lots of perspective about themselves and about their teammates. And then it also builds these great friendships off of books. So you're going to see lots of growth in your classroom with your students in reading, with themselves, and just so many different avenues. So book clubs are just one of my favorite things, and that's why I'm so passionate and excited to talk about them today. So before I get started, when I talk to teachers and do trainings over book clubs, I often have the same questions. And so these might be some of your questions as well. So usually is, will this work for my students? So a lot of teachers will say, well, this won't work for my students because you don't know my students. Some of them are below level readers. Some of my students don't have, English isn't their first language. They just aren't able to do it. So that's one of the biggest questions that I have. And that's really something that you're going to have to decide after everything that I share today. And you're just really going to have to think about whether or not you want to invest the time to doing that in the classroom. And I will tell you that over the years, I've worked at several different schools in different parts of Houston area, and I've used them every single year. And they have been the best thing I ever do every single year in my classroom. So I know you can do it. You just really have to take that time to get started. And hopefully some of the ideas that I share today will help you. So the next thing is, how do I get books? That's a tough one. How do I organize my book clubs? How do I get grades and make sure that my students are doing what they should be doing? And will I have time to do book clubs in my classroom with all the million other things that I have to do? So hopefully I go over some of this information today to help you feel a little more confident if you haven't done them before. So the first thing I'm going to answer today are some book suggestions. So in upper elementary, there are trillions of books out there that we can be using with our students. And so I'm just going to share a few of my top student favorites, and these are some of the most recent favorites and some of my favorites as well. So the biggest hurdle that I get when it comes to book clubs is having books available. And so, for example, when I started book clubs in my classroom the very first year, I didn't have books. I didn't have book club books. I didn't have the money to go buy all these books. I was a college graduate, barely made any money. And so the last thing I wanted to do was spend hundreds of dollars on buying books, and I didn't even know if this was going to work. Luckily, I was at a school that was able to provide me with some books, multiple sets. And so my first year, I was using the books that my school provided. Even after, most recently, I've been using books that my school provided because I don't want to spend all that money. However, a lot of those books might not be my students' choices. So they might be books that are just available because they've been in the library forever. And so that's okay when you're getting started at the beginning. But I also am going to share some areas and where I found some books, and that might help you. So after my first year of doing that, I was able to start collecting books at places like Half Price Books, garage sales, Goodwill. Teachers that were retiring often donated to me because they knew that I was a newer teacher, and so they would give me some of their books. I had friends would find some on Facebook Marketplace. My biggest, most favorite place is Scholastic Book Clubs because they always have those dollar deals, and you know what I'm talking about. And so I always buy multiple sets when they're, for $1. And that's just a great way. And they also, if you earn those points, you get all those free books. So that's one of my favorite places. Now, some of my favorite books that my students often share are The One and Only Ivan, Because of Winn-Dixie, A Fish in a Tree, Wonder, Holes, Tiger Rising, Out of My Mind. Those are just a few of my favorites and some of my students' favorites. There are so many other books that we've read throughout time. Now, I'm going to talk to you about why my students love these books. So here's some of them. Again, so when we were reading Wonder, I guess it was a few years ago, right before the movie came out, there was such anticipation when they were reading this book. All my kids wanted to read the book because the movie was coming out. And I'm not kidding you. Every kid in my classroom had the opportunity to read that book that year. And parents, when they took their kids over the summer to see the movie, were messaging me, emailing me. Kids were emailing me. They were tagging me on Facebook saying, thanks to Miss Ortiz, we are going to see the movie Wonder because our kiddos read it in the classroom this year. So that made me so happy. I really encourage finding books that they're making movies about or that they have movies about so your kids can have something to really look forward to doing when they finish reading that book club in your classroom. So these are just some of the examples. They are coming out with the movie for The One and Only Ivan. I'm so excited about it. And they just came out with the second book on the series of The One and Only Ivan. And so there are so many like Holes, Wonder. I mean, there are just so many books out there because of Winn-Dixie that have movies. And it's just a great way to complete the book club cycle for your students. So as you know, I'm excited about it. So then the next thing is really getting my students excited and generating the excitement for them to get started on book club. So I really do that at the beginning of the school year when we start book clubs. Most of my kids do know that I do book clubs in my classroom because I do these elaborate projects at the end of each 6 weeks with my book club groups. And so most of the time we would showcase them in the library. And so kids that were coming up into our grade level wanted to be in my classroom because of these projects. They were like, oh, you know, Miss Ortiz, she does all those cool projects. And so that's one of the things when they come in and you have them do those surveys, they already knew that we were going to do those fun things. So that was a great thing that I was generating excitement even before they got into my classroom. And so I share at the beginning of the school year about book clubs, and I talk about it and how it's such a big deal and they're so lucky to get to do book clubs and that they are just going to have so much fun and grow and that they are just so important because this is something that adults do and I'm letting them do. So generating that excitement is something that is so important. And so what I do is I start a book tasting with my books right before we do them. I set out all the books on my chalkboard or my whiteboard, and I have all of them there, and then I give them a snippet, talk about the characters, talk about the book, talk about how exciting this book's going to be. So I want to build anticipation and excitement for those books so that when they get to choose their book to read, they're going to want to read several. You know, they're just not going to want to read the most popular one. Now, the great thing about doing this is that I give them the opportunity to choose their top 3 books on a piece of paper, and then I put them into their book club book groups. So this is something that I really take time in doing, and I really know all of these books. So you want to make sure that the books that you are having that 6 weeks or that 9 weeks for your students to read that you've read or you know about, because you want to be able to discuss these books with your students. And if they have questions about characters and so forth, you want to be able to really have a background. So there was a time that I did not read one of the books that I had in my book club. I knew a little bit about it. And so when my students had trouble with understanding something, I really had to go read that book very quickly. So knowing a background or reading that book prior is really important to me. So now, as I was telling you, I choose the groups depending, I let them choose their top 3, and then I choose my groups. I try to place my kids into groups that are in their reading level and that it has a group of students that work well together. So I'm not going to put 2 students that really don't work well together at the beginning of the school year. That might be something that we focus on later as they're more accustomed and have done book clubs and, prior. So you were able to do that by generating excitement, letting them choose, and the kids are never disappointed. They're excited because they got at least 1 or 2 or 3 of their top choices of book clubs. And I really try my best to have a book that's very popular available every week, every time we do book clubs, because I do want them to be able to read it during book clubs. Another thing I do point out to them is I don't want them to choose a book just because their best friend is choosing it. I want them to choose it because they want to read it. And I do tell them that I do look at that stuff, so make sure you are choosing a book that is interest to you and maybe something that they have never tried before. So if they've never read a nonfiction book, that they'll read one. Or, I really try to place them with group members that they've never worked with before, because that's how they develop new sense of friendship and, ways of exploring the book differently through different eyes. So I also set high expectations for my students in book clubs, and I'm going to tell you, they've never disappointed me because they know how exciting it is and such a privilege to read these book clubs in our classroom that they strive to meet those expectations. So the next question I always have with teachers is organization. So they are often wondering, how are you going to organize book clubs if you get started with them? So I'm going to share some ways that I've done it in my classroom. And like I said before, your book clubs can range in sizes, and you can have as many, you might have 20 students in your classroom, you might have 30 students in your classroom. So you really will group your students according to how many students you have in your classroom. So I would sometimes have 5 to 6 groups going on. And there are often times, like when we had the book Wonder, I had at a point 2 groups that were reading Wonder at the same time. The groups were not combined. I still had my 4 to 5 students, but there was 2 groups, and I had enough books at that time for them to do that. So just depending on your class size, that's how you'll group them. And so I also, in my groups, I had different roles, and I'm sure you've heard about group book club roles. And so I had discussion leader who kind of helped organize the discussion that was happening in the group. We had a word wizard, imaginative illustrator, star summarizer, character catcher, real life connector, and you can see some of those posters are behind me. I had them displayed in our reading nook area right by our book club. I'm going to show that area to you because I have some pictures of it in just a moment. So those were large, hanging on my bulletin board, but then I also provided these posters for my students to put into their book club folder, and I'll talk about the folder in just a minute. And they all had different roles, and so these roles often changed. So just because they were the discussion leader one day does not mean they're going to be the discussion leader the next time. I would tell them, okay, it's time to rotate the roles, and so they knew that if they hadn't been one, they were going to rotate, and I had it set up in a different way so they knew how to go. So all of that is part of setting it up at the beginning of the school year. And so with organization, for me, it was very important to have it organized right before school. I had all my book clubs set up, and we usually started book clubs about third week of the school year after everything is done with testing, beginning of the school year, paperwork, and everything. I really got into book clubs right away because I spent about a week going over them with my students and really setting up everything for them. They had book club folders. They got to choose their books. You know, they got to get started. They got to meet with their partners. Everything was very set for my classroom. And I'm going to show you some other ways that I used, I helped organize it. Now, I had folders, like I was saying, and inside the folders, they had a packet of accountability activities, and I'm going to share those shortly as well. They had sticky notes. They had their book club discussion cards where they had their roles. They had some like reading STEM questions, like right here. So these are just STEMs when they were in their book club. If they couldn't think of questions to ask each other, I provided them with some easy STEMs that they could use to talk about. That also, anything else that was book club related was inside that folder, and anything that I wanted to last, I tried to laminate so they would just keep it in there. And that was something that they were able to go back to and use and reflect with. And sometimes I checked those folders to make sure they had it organized and kept up with. So let me just give you an example of how I organized my books and my book bins and my little area. So I had a corner in my classroom just for book clubs, and so I would put my book clubs inside the bin. Now the purpose for me doing this is I would have loved to have provided that book for my students to keep for the whole 6 weeks and take home and take to their other classes, but because I had multiple classrooms or classes I taught, they could only use it in the classroom because I had to share those books with my other students as well. So here's some example of how I kept them in my bins. And so they were labeled in the bookcase. And then right next to the bookcase was my posters. And then underneath, if you can barely see, it's where I had their folders labeled, and they would just have their book club folders in there and all their other utensils that they needed to use when they were working on book clubs. So now, part of organizing was how did I manage the time that we worked on book clubs. So depending on your class schedule and your time frame, that's really how you were going to manage your book club. I had my students meet 3 to 4 times a week. Oftentimes we couldn't meet because of other things going on, and that's going to happen. And so you just tell your kiddos, okay, this week you're going to meet 3 times in your book club, or there might be weeks that you can meet 5 times, and we could meet sometimes 10 to 20 minutes, 10 to 30 minutes. So it just depended on what was going on in our classroom that made it available for our book club meeting. So a majority of their meeting time with their other book club team members was discussing the book and going over, because that was the whole purpose. You want them to collaborate and talk about the book and really build insight and knowledge of the book. So that was really the biggest chunk of time that we had there. The next largest part of time was where the students are completing their accountability pages. And then of course I gave them time to set up and gather everything, but I had everything in a very close proximity. So usually it was the discussion leader that would go gather all the materials that they needed, and they would bring it back to the group, and they had different spots throughout my classroom that they would meet with their book clubs. So even though everything was that one area, not all of them got to meet in that area. And I also, which made it easier for me and for my students, and they kept this in the folder, is this sheet right here. And so what it is it is a schedule, and each week the students knew what pages to read. This was very important for me to have, and I used it every single year. And so my students, for example, if they were reading Charlotte's Web, they knew week 1 they would read chapters 1 through 3. And so they would have time to read, meet with their classmates on their book. The week 2, they would read 4 through 7. Week 3, 8 through 11. And so each book was broken up by chapters for them to read. There they are. And I provided that for you to start using today, and it's editable. So yours is going to look like this, and then you are going to be able to plug in your information into the sheet that is provided. Hopefully that'll help you with some organizing there. So the next thing I want to go over is expectations and accountability. So in your classroom, you're going to have certain expectations for what your students are doing, and they need to be clear and concise when you're using book clubs. So some of the students are going to want to know certain things. Like I just shared before, we had a book club schedule, so they knew what they needed to be reading. They knew the pages, the chapters, what their job is. So all of these questions that I have here, I was able to report and answer for them because they knew. They needed to know how long they were meeting. I would set a timer for that. They needed to know their group expectations. I'm going to go over that in a second. They needed to know what was happening, and if somebody in their group wasn't pulling their job, doing their work, they were just coasting along. Every group member had responsibilities, and I had activities that they were able to use to showcase what they were doing. They needed to know what they're graded on, their rubrics, and what happens if they're finished. They are never finished, because if they're finished, they are reading for the next week. So there was always stuff to be going on in book clubs, and my kids loved it because they knew clear expectations, they knew what to do, and they didn't really have any questions. And if they did, that was something that I would fix immediately so that it wouldn't be something that they were questioning. So part of the expectations and accountability is that at the beginning of the year, when I was building all that anticipation and excitement, we created a book club contract. And this was something that the whole class agreed on. Just like with any contract that you do in your classroom, your students will really love having this contract. So we just went over, I created this for my classroom. And so, for example, they read their books, they completed assignments, they will be kind to their teammates. And so this is a generic one that I'm providing you for today. And I also have this available for you to edit and customize to meet your students' needs. But you are going to want to create this with your class at the beginning of the school year. And a tip that I have for you, and I use this, is I printed it out with all the signatures and I copied it, and I gave it to each student to put into their folder. So if there was a student that really wasn't on target with their contract, I would say, you need to go back and read that contract because you signed that. And that's a really important contract that we made as a class. So hopefully you're not breaking it. And they were like, oh, no, no, no. And so that was something that they were really took to heart. So if you use that, you can make small student copies, and then I made a large one and I put it in my book club area. So the next thing is, like I said, you want to have all your students' materials available, close proximity, and they know where they are. Have a student like the discussion leader go get those materials, have everything inside a folder or a little manila folder or something where they can keep it, have books available, label them. And most importantly, something that I often did was I revisited expectations, our contract, our rules, every time they met with book clubs, whether or not it was weekly or every single time. Depending on your class needs, you'll know when to reflect over that. And your kids, sometimes they'll try to take that little extra I guess, freedom and not act perfectly, but most of the time they are really on target with book clubs. And you'll love that, having those expectations, they'll really follow through with them. So that's just, having the leaders, I put that there. Now, another question that's often asked is, what is the teacher doing? So at the beginning of the school year, the teacher is going to really be modeling and showing what they're expecting from their students. And that's something that I do for about 3 weeks, is I am really there and present and visiting every single group to make sure they are on target and knowing what they need to be doing for their book clubs. And so I'm checking in. I am sitting down with them for a few minutes and discussing with them, because I've read the book, so I know what it's about. And then as your students become more fluent with their book clubs, your role is going to start changing. That time for me, after a few weeks of them knowing what to do, I started pulling my small groups that I needed to meet with. And so I'd pull my guided reading groups or my guided writing groups, or I would meet with kids that, needed that extra help in a certain area in my classroom. So that was a great time that I felt comfortable, because I knew my students were on target with their book clubs, and I was able to pull my smaller groups. And so throughout book clubs, you are going to love that, because they are able to really focus and learn. They're not just sitting there silently reading, and you're able to pull your groups that you need to meet with. And so that is something that was the main reason that I started book clubs, is because I needed to be able to pull my smaller groups, and I wanted my students to be doing something that was really on target and something that I felt confident they were really learning. So that you're going to be able to do that as you monitor your students' growth in there. Now, my students' assessment. So we know what the teacher's doing. What is the student doing, and how do you know that they are really doing it? So I did always have student assessments. Now, I call it a student assessment. It's more of an activity that they do weekly. It's called book club reflection or book club packet, and it's a 6-week accountability packet. And so I've been doing this forever, since I can remember, and I just created a weekly packet that they would check in, and they were able to complete these quickly, because these were questions that they were already talking about with their group members. What was the setting of this chapter? What was the character doing? Give me a small summary. Give me a connection that you made. And so these are just something that shows me that they were actually reading and on target with their book. And also, I was able to take a grade on it. And so I know we're often, at my district, we needed to have some grades in our grade book. So this was a great way for me to have a weekly reading grade, because I knew that they were actually reading these books, they were on target with it, and they were doing the activity. I also, because I wanted to make sure that all my students were doing what they should be doing, I had them do reflection weekly. So they let me know what they contributed to the group, what their reflection was of the book, what they needed to work on for the next week, something that they saw another group member that they were proud of. Now, these are just extra activities. You don't have to use these with your students. They worked for me in my classroom, and I have been using them forever. And this was just something that helped me know that my students were on target on where they should be in book club. So I often also had sticky notes and other things that they would use in their book club, and they would put those sticky notes in their folders and so forth, the questions they had, and so many other things. And I was able to take, participation grades and so forth. Now, the biggest thing I told y'all that I drive anticipation is those projects. So as I said at the beginning, that I really build that excitement when we get started in the 6 weeks of our book club. And I'm going to share with you some of the projects that we did. And these are just a culmination of the book club for the 6 weeks. Just a great way for students to showcase that they had a great time with their book. So some of them that we've used throughout time, that I've used with my students, some are independent and some are group. You will know which students can do them, but I usually like to share at the beginning, okay, at the end of this 6 weeks, this is the project that we're going to do. And so I really tell them we won't be able to do that project if everyone's not participating and doing what they should be doing. And they are all striving because they all want to do this project, and it takes us about a week to usually do. And so some of them are book review pennants. They create games on their books. They do lap books. They do dioramas, cereal boxes, movie strips, posters. Oh, there's just so many great projects ideas, and I have some pictures of a few of them that I want to share with you. Here's one that they created, a game. Another one where this was an independent one where they created a book review. This is a poster one. This one's a book review cereal box. I mean, there's just so many. I'm going to share some other ones that are easy ones to do as well. And these can be done independently or they can be done as a group. So this one is an online one. So if you're using Google Classroom, and then here's the book review lap book. There are templates for you to do a game, and then the pennants, of course. So hopefully, I know I've shared so much because I'm so excited about this. Hopefully you've gotten some ideas on what book clubs are like in your for upper elementary students, that you've gotten some new book ideas. If you have some great books that I might not have heard of, I would love for you to send me an email of some book ideas. Hopefully you've gotten some great organization tips on how I organize my folders in my book club area, expectations for your students, how to hold students accountable for their learning in book clubs. That 6-week packet is something I do. There's other things that work that you might be able to use with your students or you've used before. Also holding those students to those high expectations. I promise you will not regret doing that. Hopefully you got some ideas of what you're doing with your time during when they're meeting with their book clubs, and some project ideas. I know there is so much more that book clubs can offer your students, but I am so excited. And if you ever have any questions or concerns or would love more information, you can visit me anytime on my website. You could send me an email. I'm always here to help. I love meeting teachers. I'm just a talker. I'm sorry, just by nature. So if you ever need anything, I would love to hear from you. And I'm so happy that you got to join me today. And I hope that you have a great rest of the summer and a wonderful back to school time, and just many blessings for you. Have a great one, and I'll see y'all soon. Bye.